Do you know that there are things human beings once knew and then chose deliberately to hide from you? Not lost knowledge, not forgotten in the wreck of some burned library, hidden on purpose, sealed behind locked doors and unbreakable oaths, guarded by men and women who swore they would rather die than speak it aloud. We are taught to think of ancient people as simple, as our lesser ancestors, fumbling in the dark toward the light of the modern world. But the greatest civilizations of the past did something we almost never do. They built a hidden chamber inside their own knowledge, a secret room, and they decided very carefully who would be allowed inside and who would be left forever in the dark. They called them the mysteries, and they were everywhere. In Greece, the wisest men who ever lived, philosophers and generals and emperors, walked in silence into a hall at Eleusis, saw something in the dark, and refused for 2,000 years to say what it was. In Egypt, priests guarded rites in temples the public was forbidden to enter. In the brotherhood of Pythagoras, a man was said to have been killed for revealing a single mathematical secret. There were books written by a god, recipes for turning a human being into something more than human. Names of power the Kabbalists believed could unmake the world if spoken wrongly. Rituals that claimed to command demons, to send the soul flying free of the body, to open a door into the world of the dead. And binding all of it across every culture, every century, every school was the same terrible rule: you do not tell. To reveal the mysteries to the uninitiated was, in place after place, a crime punishable by death, which forces a question that should unsettle you a little the longer you sit with it. If this knowledge was harmless, why guard it with your life? And if it was worthless, why did the smartest people in history spend their lives pursuing it? What did they know or believe they knew that had to be kept from ordinary people at any cost? And who exactly decided that you were not allowed to have it? Beneath the temples and the philosophy and the sacred oaths, there may be a single thread running through all of human history, a hidden stream of forbidden knowledge, passed in secret from initiate to initiate, guarded for thousands of years, and kept deliberately from the rest of us. This is the story of the ancient mystery schools and the knowledge they did not want you to have. Welcome. Before we step through the doorway, we need to agree on what kind of journey this is, because we are going to travel a very long way from solid, documented history into some of the strangest territory the human mind has ever mapped. Some of what you will hear is established fact, recorded by ancient historians, confirmed by archaeology, beyond serious dispute. Some of it lives in old texts whose meaning scholars still argue over. And some of it stands at the very edge of what can be known at all, in the realm of claims that no historian will defend, but that millions of people across thousands of years have staked their lives and souls upon. We will walk across that entire spectrum, and we will try at every step to be honest about which ground we are standing on. Start with the word itself, because it has been softened by time. When we say mystery today, we mean a puzzle, a whodunit, something to be solved. But the ancient word meant something far heavier. It came from the Greek mysterion, and it was tied to a word that meant to close, to shut the eyes, to shut the mouth. A mystery was something you were not to see with ordinary eyes, and not to speak with an ordinary tongue. And a mystery school was an institution built around exactly that. A place, an order, a tradition, dedicated to a body of knowledge that was hidden by design, revealed only to those who were formally brought in, and forbidden to everyone else. These were not schools in the sense we know. You did not enroll, attend lectures, and graduate. You were initiated. You underwent a process, often long, often frightening, sometimes physically dangerous, at the end of which you were shown something, or told something, or made to experience something that changed you, and that you were then bound never to reveal. And here is the crucial thing to understand. This was not a fringe practice, tucked away in the corners of the ancient world. It was central. It was mainstream. The mystery schools of Greece were attended by the pillars of classical civilization. The temple mysteries of Egypt sat at the heart of a culture that lasted 3,000 years. From the philosophers of Athens to the emperors of Rome, from the priesthoods of the Nile to the mystics of medieval Europe, the idea of a hidden, initiatory, forbidden knowledge was woven through the entire fabric of the ancient world. It was simply understood that the deepest truths were not for everyone. And every one of these schools, scattered across cultures and centuries that had little or nothing to do with one another, shared a single defining feature: the oath of secrecy. To be initiated was, first and above all, to swear, to bind yourself by the most solemn vows a human being could make, to never reveal what you had learned, and these were not gentle promises. In many of the mysteries, the penalty for breaking the oath, for speaking the secret to the uninitiated, was death, not a metaphor, not a spiritual consequence, execution. Think about what that means, and think about how strange it is. Whatever these schools were protecting, they protected it with the ultimate sanction, and it worked. The oath of Eleusis held for the better part of 2,000 years. Across all that time, among all those thousands of initiates, including some of the most articulate writers who ever lived, the core secret was kept so completely that to this day, we cannot say with certainty what it was. This is the thread we are going to follow through everything that comes. The veil, the oath, the deliberate, disciplined, sometimes lethal machinery of secrecy that shows up again and again in school after school, as if all of them were guarding the same thing, or at least guarding in the same way. Every time we meet a new mystery, watch for it. The locked door, the graded revelation, the vow of silence. It is the signature of the forbidden, and it is everywhere. So here is the road before us. We will begin in Greece at Eleusis, with the most famous and best documented secret in the ancient world, a rite that the greatest minds of antiquity called the most important experience of their lives and never explained. We will look closely at the machinery of the oath itself, the grades of initiation, and the discipline of silence that bound every school. Then we will go to Egypt, the source the Greeks themselves pointed back to, into the temple mysteries of Isis and Osiris, and to the persistent claim of initiation chambers hidden beneath the pyramids. We will meet Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great teacher said to be a god in the form of a book, and the emerald tablet with its recipe for becoming divine. We will enter the secret brotherhood of Pythagoras, where mathematics was sacred and a man was murdered over a number. We will descend with Orpheus into the mysteries of the soul and the afterlife. And then we will move into deeper and stranger waters, the forbidden science of alchemy and its dream of transmutation, the Kabbalah and the names of God so powerful they were said to be able to unmake creation, King Solomon and his command over demons, the ritual technology of summoning, and the ultimate secret many of these schools may have shared, the flight of the soul beyond the body, the practiced death, the journey through the world of the dead. We will trace the golden thread that seems to connect all of them, one hidden stream running from ancient Egypt down into the secret societies of the modern age. And at the end, we will confront the question that has driven us from the start: why? Why was this knowledge kept from the public? What were they so afraid of? And what, in the end, were they really guarding? The door is open. The oath is waiting. Let us go inside. Let us begin with a secret that is not a theory, not a legend, not a matter of speculation. Let us begin with the single best documented, best attested, most successful secret in the entire history of the Western world. A secret kept so perfectly by so many people for so long that even now, after everything modern scholarship can bring to bear, we still cannot say for certain what it was. 14 miles northwest of Athens, along a road the ancient Greeks called the Sacred Way, there stood a sanctuary in a town called Eleusis. And for close to 2,000 years, once a year, thousands of people walked that road to be initiated into the most revered rite of the ancient world, the Eleusinian Mysteries. Hold that span of time in your mind because it is almost impossible to grasp. The mysteries of Eleusis were celebrated in some form from at least around 1,500 years before the Common Era, and they continued unbroken year after year until the very end of the ancient pagan world, when a Christian emperor outlawed them and invading Goths destroyed the sanctuary near the close of the 4th century of our era. 2,000 years. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the entire span from the birth of Christ to today, and then again half as long once more. Across all of that time, across the rise and fall of Athens, the conquests of Alexander, the whole arc of the Roman Empire, the mysteries endured and their central secret held. And this was not a small, obscure cult. The Eleusinian Mysteries sat at the very center of Greek and then Roman religious life. They were open, remarkably, to almost everyone, men and women, rich and poor, free citizens and even slaves. Almost anyone who spoke Greek and had not been stained by the crime of murder could be initiated. This was, in a sense, the most democratic secret in the ancient world, offered to the multitude. And yet, the secret was kept, because the price of revealing it was death. The initiates swore an oath never to speak of what they experienced within the great hall, and they did not. Think about who these people were. The initiates of Eleusis included the towering figures of classical civilization, the philosopher Plato, almost certainly, Sophocles and Aeschylus, the great tragedians, Pindar the poet, the Roman statesman and orator Cicero. Emperors of Rome, including Hadrian and Marcus Aurelius, made the journey to be initiated. These were the most eloquent, most articulate, most prolific writers and thinkers who have ever lived, people who wrote down everything, who argued about everything, who left us millions of words on every subject under the sun. And on this one subject, they fell silent. Every one of them, for 2,000 years. Not a single initiate ever wrote down the central secret of what was revealed in the Telesterion, the great hall of initiation. We have hints, fragments, the accounts of hostile outsiders guessing from beyond the veil, but the core, the thing itself, the actual experience at the heart of the mysteries, was carried to the grave by every person who ever knew it. That is the power of the oath. That is what disciplined secrecy can do, and it should make us pause right at the start of our journey, because it proves something important. A secret, a real and specific secret, can be kept perfectly by a vast number of people across an almost unimaginable span of time. When we later meet claims of hidden knowledge passed down through the ages, remember Eleusis. It is not fantasy that such a thing is possible. Here is the proof standing in the historical record. It happened. So what do we actually know? Let us walk the road ourselves, as far as the evidence will take us, and see where the veil finally falls. The mysteries were built around a myth, and the myth we do know because it was told openly. It is the story of Demeter, the great goddess of the grain and the harvest, and her daughter Persephone. Persephone is seized by Hades, the lord of the underworld, and dragged down into the realm of the dead. Demeter, in her grief, wanders the earth, and the world withers. Nothing grows. Winter falls upon everything. At last, a bargain is struck. Persephone is allowed to return to the world above, but because she has eaten of the food of the dead, she must descend again each year, and so the seasons turn. The grain dies into the earth and is reborn. Death and return. Descent and resurrection. This was the open, public myth. But the mysteries were not about hearing the story. They were about experiencing something. Each year, the initiates would gather in Athens for the greater mysteries. There were days of preparation, of ritual bathing in the sea, of fasting, of sacrifice. And then the great procession set out along the sacred way, 14 miles from Athens to Eleusis, a vast crowd of the initiated, carrying sacred objects, singing, shouting the name of the god, walking through the day and into the torchlit night. When they arrived, exhausted, fasting, keyed to a pitch of anticipation, they broke their fast by drinking a special potion. It was called the kykeon, and we know from the ancient sources roughly what it was. A drink made of barley and water, flavored with mint, a humble mixture on the face of it. And then, having drunk the kykeon, the initiates entered the telesterion, the great hall of initiation, in darkness. And here the record goes quiet. Here is where the oath begins. We know the experience was structured around three things, which the Greeks called the things done, the things said, and the things shown. There was a sacred drama, a reenactment perhaps of the descent and return acted out in the dark. There were sacred words spoken by the Hierophant, the chief priest whose title means the one who reveals the holy things. And there was a revelation, a showing, a moment when something was displayed to the initiates in a blaze of light. One ancient source, a Christian writer named Hippolytus, who was hostile to the mysteries and eager to expose them, claimed that the great revelation was this. The Hierophant in silence displayed a single ear of grain reaped in silence, a stalk of wheat, and that is either the most anticlimactic secret in history, or it is a clue to something far deeper. Because if the entire 2,000-year mystery came down to holding up a stalk of grain, then the grain must have meant something overwhelming. The grain that dies in the earth and is reborn, the seed that must be buried to live. In the context of a night engineer to strip away the self, it may have been not information at all, but a trigger, the final image in an experience designed to make the initiate feel in their body and soul the truth of death and rebirth. Because here is the deepest point about Eleusis, and it will matter for everything that follows in this story. The ancient philosopher Aristotle made a remark about the mysteries that cuts right to the heart of them. He said that those who were initiated were not there to learn something, but to experience something, and to be brought into a certain state of mind. Sit with that. The secret of Eleusis may not have been a piece of information at all. It may not have been a fact you could write down, or a doctrine you could betray in a sentence. It may have been an experience so profound, so transformative, that it could not be communicated in words, even if you tried, and that only the shared knowledge of having passed through it bound the initiates together in their silence. And whatever it was, it did something to people. This is the part that is genuinely, historically astonishing. The initiates of Eleusis came out changed, and specifically, they came out unafraid of death. Listen to what they themselves said about it in the open, without ever revealing the secret. Cicero, the hard-headed Roman statesman, not a man given to mystical gushing, wrote that of all the things Athens had given the world, nothing was greater than the mysteries, through which, he said, we have learned the principles of life and gained the power not only to live in happiness, but to die with a better hope. Pindar wrote that whoever has seen the mysteries goes beneath the earth blessed, for he knows the end of life and its God-given beginning. Sophocles wrote that thrice blessed are those mortals who have seen these rites before they go down to Hades, for they alone have true life there. Over and over, the same testimony. We saw something at Eleusis, and afterward we were no longer afraid to die. Something in that dark hall, after the fasting and the procession and the kykeon, gave the greatest minds of the ancient world a serene and lasting confidence in the face of death itself. And they could not tell you what it was. Now, the modern world has tried, of course, to break the oath from the outside. The most famous attempt came in the 20th century, when a group of researchers, including the chemist who discovered LSD, Albert Hofmann, proposed a startling theory. They argued that the kykeon, that humble barley drink, may have been psychoactive. Specifically, that the barley may have been infected with ergot, a fungus that grows on grain and that contains compounds chemically related to LSD. In this theory, the initiates of Eleusis were in effect drinking a naturally occurring psychedelic, and the overwhelming visionary experience in the telesterion was a chemically induced altered state. It is a fascinating idea, and it would explain a great deal: the intensity of the experience, its ineffability, the way it seemed to dissolve the fear of death. But we have to be honest, as we always will be. It remains a hypothesis, and a contested one. There is no hard proof that the kykeon contained ergot. Preparing a safe dose from ergot, which is also highly toxic, would have required knowledge we cannot confirm the priests possessed. Many scholars remain deeply skeptical. The chemical theory is plausible, even compelling, but it is not established fact, and we should not pretend it is. The truth is that we still do not know what happened in that hall, and that is exactly the point. That is why Eleusis is the perfect doorway into this entire story. Here is a real mystery school at the center of the ancient world, embraced by its greatest minds, guarding a genuine secret, an actual transformative experience, behind an oath so strong it held for 2,000 years and has never been fully broken. Not a legend, not a conspiracy theory, history. The veil at Eleusis was real, and it worked. The knowledge behind it, whatever it was deemed so sacred, so powerful, or so dangerous that it was hidden from all but the initiated and protected by the threat of death. And the people who passed behind that veil came back transformed and kept their word. So the question that will drive us forward is already alive. If this is what a mystery school could be, a real one, a documented one, then what about the others? What was hidden in the temples of Egypt, in the brotherhood of Pythagoras, in the forbidden books of the alchemists and the Kabbalists? If the secret of Eleusis was an experience too deep for words, were the other secrets the same, or were some of them something else entirely, something more concrete, more dangerous, more forbidden? To begin to answer that, we have to understand the machinery itself. The oath, the grades of initiation, the discipline of silence that Eleusis shared with every mystery school that ever existed. We have to understand how you keep a secret for 2,000 years and why. That is where we go next. We have seen what a secret can do. Now we need to understand how it was kept, because the machinery of secrecy is the one thing every mystery school shared. And once you learn to see it, you will recognize it everywhere we go. The mysteries were not a single locked door. They were a series of doors, one behind another, and you were let through them one at a time, only as you proved yourself ready. This is the first and most important thing to understand about the mystery schools. Knowledge was not given all at once. It was released in stages, in grades, on a ladder of revelation that the initiate climbed slowly over years, sometimes over a lifetime. At Eleusis, you did not simply walk in and see the secret. First, you underwent the lesser mysteries, a preliminary initiation, a purification and preparation held months before. Only then were you eligible for the greater mysteries, and even then there was a further grade beyond the first initiation. Those who returned a second time could become an epoptes, a word that means the one who has seen, the highest rank, the one permitted to witness the deepest revelation of all. This pattern of graded ascent appears again and again across the ancient world, in schools that had no contact with one another. In the mysteries of Mithras, the Persian god whose cult spread through the Roman army, there were 7 grades of initiation, each named and ranked from the raven at the bottom through the lion and the Persian and the sun runner up to the father at the summit. In the school of Pythagoras, as we will see, there were listeners on the outside and deeper in, the true learners. In tradition after tradition, the initiate rose through levels, each one opening a further chamber of the hidden knowledge. Why build knowledge this way? The schools themselves gave an answer, and it is worth taking seriously. They believed that certain truths were dangerous to the unprepared, that a revelation given to a mind not ready to receive it would be, at best, wasted, and at worst, destructive. Knowledge, in this view, was like a powerful medicine that could heal or poison, depending entirely on the readiness of the one who took it. The grades were not just gatekeeping, they were, in the school's own understanding, a way of protecting the student from a truth that could break them if it came too soon. Hold that idea, because it is one of the 2 great answers to the question that drives this whole film. Why was the knowledge kept from the public? One answer, which we will return to at the end, is that it was hidden to protect the powerful. But this is the other answer, that it was hidden to protect the people. That some things given too early or to the wrong person do harm. But whatever the reason, the enforcement was absolute. And here we come to the hard edge of the mysteries, the thing that separates them from a mere club or a philosophy. To reveal the secret was, in many of these traditions, to die. This was not an idle threat. We have a real documented case from the very heart of classical Athens. In the year 415 before the Common Era, on the eve of a great military expedition, the city was convulsed by a scandal known as the profanation of the mysteries. It was alleged that a group of aristocratic young men, in the privacy of their homes, had mockingly performed the sacred rites of Eleusis, acting out the secret ceremonies as a drunken entertainment and revealing them to the uninitiated. The reaction was not amusement, it was horror and fury. This was treated as a crime against the gods and against the state itself. Men were arrested, some were executed, others fled into exile to escape a death sentence. Among those implicated was Alcibiades, one of the most brilliant and powerful men in Athens, a golden figure of the age, and even he was condemned to death for it and driven from the city. The mere mockery of the mysteries, the mere hint that their secrets had been aired, was enough to destroy careers and end lives. Think about what that tells us. The people of the ancient world did not regard the oath of secrecy as a formality. They regarded its violation as one of the gravest crimes a human being could commit. on the level of treason, on the level of murder. The secret was sacred, and it was protected by the full weight of law and religion and the fear of divine punishment. And this is why the mysteries held. This is how a secret survives 2,000 years, not because human beings are naturally good at keeping quiet, but because the cost of speaking was made unbearable, and because the initiates genuinely believed that to reveal the mystery was to commit a spiritual catastrophe, to profane something holy, to bring ruin on themselves and their city. And where death was not enough, there was a subtler protection, one that would prove far more durable, and that we will meet in every school still to come. The initiates learned to hide the knowledge inside language itself. The mysteries developed what later Christians would call the disciplina arcani, the discipline of the secret. The teachings were wrapped in symbol, allegory, myth, and code. They were spoken of, when they were spoken of at all, in figures that meant one thing to the outsider and another, deeper thing to the initiate. The brotherhood of Pythagoras communicated through symbol, cryptic sayings whose surface meaning concealed an inner teaching. The alchemists, as we will see, buried their entire science in a jungle of deliberately obscure imagery, of green lions and red kings and marriages of the sun and moon, so that only an adept who already held the key could read the recipe. The Kabbalists encoded meaning in the very shapes and numbers of the Hebrew letters. This is one of the most important ideas in the whole history of forbidden knowledge. The secret was often hidden not behind a locked door, but in plain sight, written down, published even, but in a language that only the initiated could truly read. The text was open, the meaning was sealed, and to break the seal you did not need to steal the book. You needed to be taught the key, and you were only taught the key if you had passed through the grades and sworn the oath. So this is the machinery. A ladder of grades climbed slowly and only by the worthy. An oath of silence enforced at its harshest by death, and a coded language that hid the meaning even from those who held the words. This is the veil, and from here on, watch for it in every school we enter. It is the fingerprint of the forbidden. Now, armed with an understanding of how the mysteries protected themselves, we can begin to ask what they were protecting. And to find the deepest root, we have to leave Greece and follow the trail the Greeks themselves followed, back to the civilization they regarded as the ancient fountainhead of all sacred knowledge, back to the temples of Egypt. When the Greeks wanted to explain where their own wisdom came from, they pointed in one direction, south and east, across the sea, to the oldest civilization they knew, to Egypt. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century before our era, was told by Egyptian priests that many of the Greek religious practices, including elements of the mysteries themselves, had originated in Egypt. Whether or not that was literally true, it tells us how the ancient world saw things. Egypt was the source, the deep well, the land where the priests had guarded sacred knowledge for thousands of years before Athens ever raised a temple. And in Egypt, the machinery of the mysteries reached back further than anywhere else on earth. At the heart of Egyptian religion lay a story of death and resurrection, and it should sound familiar because it follows the same deep pattern we found at Eleusis. It is the myth of Osiris. Osiris was a divine king, a bringer of civilization. His jealous brother, Set, murdered him, and in some versions cut his body into pieces and scattered them across the land. But Osiris had a wife, the great goddess Isis, whose devotion and magical power were beyond measure. Isis gathered the scattered pieces of her husband's body, reassembled them, and through her magic breathed life back into him long enough to conceive their son, Horus. Osiris did not return to rule the living. Instead, he became the Lord of the dead, the king of the afterlife, the one who had passed through death and come out the other side transformed, and who now offered that same passage to others, death and resurrection, the God who dies and returns. It is the same heartbeat that drove Eleusis, and it drove the mysteries of Egypt too, because the promise held out to the Egyptian initiate was staggering. To be initiated into the mysteries of Osiris was, in a sense, to die before you died. To identify yourself so completely with the murdered and resurrected God that you shared in his triumph over death. The initiate became Osiris, symbolically passed through death and emerged reborn, no longer afraid of the end, assured of eternal life. We are not entirely guessing here, because from the ancient world there survives one extraordinary document. In the 2nd century of our era, a Roman writer named Apuleius wrote a novel called The Golden Ass, and in its final book he describes in the first person the initiation of his hero into the mysteries of Isis. It is the closest thing we have to an eyewitness account of a mystery initiation from the inside. And even Apuleius, writing openly, stops at the veil. He tells us he cannot reveal the secret, but he gives us a tantalizing glimpse. He writes that he approached the very boundary of death, that he set foot on the threshold of the underworld, and that he was carried through all the elements and returned. He says that at the dead of night he saw the sun blazing with brilliant light, and that he came face to face with the gods below and the gods above, and worshipped them close at hand. I approached the boundary of death. I saw the sun at midnight. That is what the initiate of Isis was willing to say, and no more. The rest was sealed behind the oath. And who guarded all this? In Egypt, the keepers of the sacred knowledge were the priesthood, and they were not merely ceremonial figures. They were the intellectual class of the ancient world, the astronomers, the physicians, the mathematicians, the scribes. And the knowledge they guarded was housed in an institution whose very name is evocative. The Egyptians called it the House of Life. The House of Life, the Per Ankh, was attached to the great temples, and it was something between a library, a scriptorium, a university, and a sacred archive. Here, the most important religious and magical and scientific texts were composed, copied, and stored. Here the deepest knowledge of the priesthood was preserved and transmitted, and here, crucially, access was restricted. The ordinary Egyptian did not walk into the House of Life. The inner reaches of the temples were forbidden ground, entered only by the initiated priesthood, purified, sworn, and prepared. Once again, the same architecture, a body of sacred knowledge, a trained and initiated elite to guard it, a forbidden inner space the public could not enter, and a discipline of secrecy that kept the deepest teachings within the priesthood alone. Whatever the priests of Egypt truly knew, in their astronomy, their medicine, their embalming that preserved bodies across millennia, their engineering that raised monuments we still cannot fully explain, it was held close, protected, and passed from initiate to initiate behind temple walls. And it is here, around the temples and above all around the pyramids, that history shades into one of the most persistent and seductive claims in all of alternative thought. The claim that the great monuments of Egypt were not only tombs, but places of initiation, that somewhere beneath the sands of Giza, in hidden chambers, the highest mysteries were performed and perhaps still lie waiting. The idea has a long history. When Napoleon led his expedition to Egypt at the end of the 18th century, a story attached itself to him that he spent a night alone inside the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid and emerged shaken and would never say what he had experienced. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Esoteric writers built entire systems on the belief that the Great Pyramid was a temple of initiation. Its interior passages, a route the candidate walked in symbolic death and rebirth. The great stone sarcophagus in the king's chamber, the very vessel in which the initiate lay to undergo the trial. And the American seer Edgar Cayce famously prophesied that beneath the paws of the Sphinx lay a hidden hall of records, a repository of the knowledge of a lost civilization waiting to be rediscovered. Now we must be careful and honest, as we always are. Mainstream Egyptology firmly rejects these claims. The pyramids, the evidence overwhelmingly indicates, were tombs, monumental machines for the burial and resurrection of the God-King, not initiation halls for the living. There is no archaeological evidence that the Great Pyramid was ever used for the kind of initiation rites the esoteric tradition describes. The Hall of Records has never been found, and no credible evidence for it exists. When we step onto this ground, we step off the map of documented history and into the realm of belief and speculation, and we should say so plainly. And yet, set aside the most extravagant claims, the hidden halls and the lost civilizations, and something real remains, something that keeps the question alive. Egypt genuinely was a civilization of guarded sacred knowledge. It genuinely did practice mysteries of death and resurrection. Its temples genuinely did contain forbidden inner sanctuaries and a priesthood sworn to secrecy. The instinct that led people to imagine initiation chambers beneath the pyramids was not baseless. It grew from a true seed, the undeniable fact that here, more than anywhere, the ancient world hid its deepest knowledge behind walls and swore its keepers to silence. The Greeks looked to Egypt as the source. And from that same well, the ancient world drew a figure who would become the patron of all hidden knowledge, a teacher said to be a god himself, whose name would echo through the mystery traditions for the next 3,000 years. A being who was, they said, the very author of the sacred books. His name was Thoth. The Greeks called him Hermes, and they called him thrice great. Every tradition of hidden knowledge needs a source, a first teacher, a fountainhead from which the sacred wisdom is said to flow. And across the entire Western esoteric tradition, from Egypt through Greece, through the Islamic world, through the European Renaissance, and down to the secret societies of today, that fountainhead has one name: Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice great. For thousands of years, this figure was regarded not as a myth or a symbol, but as a real and immensely ancient sage, the greatest teacher who ever lived, the man or the god who first gave humanity the arts of writing, mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and above all, the secret knowledge of the divine. Where did he come from? Hermes Trismegistus was born from the meeting of two civilizations. When the Greeks came to Egypt, they encountered the Egyptian god Thoth, the ibis-headed deity of writing, wisdom, magic, and the moon, the divine scribe who recorded the judgment of souls and who was said to have authored the sacred books of Egyptian knowledge. The Greeks looked at Thoth and saw their own god, Hermes, the messenger, the guide of souls, the patron of language and hidden things. And so the two fused into one, a single towering figure of divine wisdom, Hermes Trismegistus. The title, thrice great, spoke to his supremacy. He was great as a philosopher, great as a priest, great as a king, the master of all three domains of ancient wisdom, and attributed to him was a body of writings, the Hermetica, texts that claimed to contain the direct teaching of divine wisdom, dialogues in which the master reveals to his disciples the nature of God, the cosmos, and the human soul. In the greatest of them, a text called the Poimandres, a divine being appears to Hermes and unveils the secret of creation and the path by which the human soul can ascend back to its divine source. Here is a teacher who is also a god, and a body of knowledge that claims to come not from human reasoning but from divine revelation, the ultimate authority, the original secret handed down from a divine source at the dawn of time. And at the very center of the Hermetic tradition sits a single phrase, perhaps the most famous formula in the entire history of the occult. 4 words that were believed to hold the master key to the universe: as above, so below. The meaning is deceptively simple and endlessly deep. It holds that the universe is a unity, that every level of reality mirrors every other, that the pattern of the heavens is reflected in the pattern of the earth, that the structure of the vast cosmos is repeated in the structure of the tiny human being. The great world and the small world, the macrocosm and the microcosm, are built on the same design. What is above is like what is below, and what is below is like what is above. If that principle is true, its implications are staggering, and they underlie the whole of the esoteric tradition. It means the human being is a mirror of the entire cosmos, containing within itself, in miniature, everything that exists in the heavens. It means that by understanding yourself, you can understand the universe, and by acting on one level of reality, you might act upon another. It is the philosophical foundation of astrology, which reads the pattern of the stars to understand the pattern of a human life. It is the foundation of magic, which acts upon symbols and images in the belief that they connect to the greater forces they represent. And it is the foundation of alchemy, which we are about to enter, and which believed that the transformation of base metal into gold and the transformation of the human soul into something divine were one and the same operation carried out on 2 levels of a single mirrored reality. And that 4-word formula, as above, so below, comes to us from one specific and extraordinary source, a short, cryptic, deeply mysterious text attributed to Hermes himself. The Emerald Tablet. The legend of the Emerald Tablet is itself a perfect image of forbidden knowledge. It was said to be a tablet of solid emerald or green stone, on which Hermes had inscribed the deepest secret of the universe in a handful of cryptic lines. In some tellings, it was discovered in a hidden vault, clutched in the hands of the entombed Hermes himself, the ultimate secret waiting in the dark to be found. The text passed through the Arabic world in the early medieval period and into Latin Europe, where it became nothing less than the founding scripture of alchemy. And what does it say? It is very short, and almost every line is a riddle. It speaks of the one thing from which all things come, of a great work of transformation, of a force that ascends from earth to heaven and descends again, gathering the power of things above and things below. It declares that by this process one may obtain the glory of the whole world, and that all darkness will flee from you. It is, in the reading of the alchemists, a coded recipe, not merely for turning metal into gold, but for the transformation of the operator, the initiate, into something perfected and divine. Because this is the secret dream at the heart of the Hermetic tradition, and it is the most forbidden idea of all, that the human being is not fixed, that we are not condemned to remain what we are, that through the sacred knowledge, through the great work, a human being can be transformed, elevated, perfected, and can rise to share in the nature of the divine. One Hermetic text puts it in words that would have been shocking to much of the ancient and medieval world. A great miracle, it says, is man, a being capable of becoming a god. That is the promise. And you can see immediately why such knowledge would be guarded and feared and forbidden. A teaching that says ordinary human beings can become divine without priest or king or intermediary by their own inner work is a teaching that threatens every authority that stands between the individual and the sacred. It is knowledge that gives power directly to the one who holds it, and power like that is never handed out freely. We have met the source, the divine teacher, and his emerald secret. Now we descend into the company of a real historical man who built an entire secret society around the conviction that the hidden structure of reality could be known, and who guarded that knowledge so fiercely that, according to legend, his followers committed murder to protect it. A man whose name every schoolchild knows for a theorem, but whose true life was stranger and darker and far more secret than the mathematics that bears his name, Pythagoras. You know his name. You learned it in school, attached to a theorem about the sides of a right triangle. And that is precisely the problem, because the tame textbook Pythagoras is one of the great disguises in history. The real Pythagoras was not a mathematics teacher. He was the founder of one of the most influential, most secretive, and most dangerous mystery schools the ancient world ever produced. Pythagoras lived in the 6th century before our era. Born on the Greek island of Samos, he traveled widely, and the ancient traditions say he was initiated into the mysteries of many lands, including, tellingly, the sacred knowledge of Egypt, drinking from that same deep well we just left. And then he settled in the Greek city of Croton in the south of Italy, and there he founded not a school in the ordinary sense, but a community, a brotherhood, an order of men and women who lived together under a strict rule, bound by shared beliefs and, above all, by secrecy. To enter the Pythagorean brotherhood was to submit to a total transformation of your life. Initiates held their property in common. They followed strict rules of diet and conduct and daily discipline. They practiced silence, self-examination, and rigorous purification of body and mind. And they were divided, as the mysteries always were, into grades. The outer circle were called the akousmatikoi, the listeners. They were taught the rules and the doctrines to be accepted on the authority of the master, but they were kept at the threshold, receiving the teachings only in their outer form. The inner circle were the mathematikoi, the learners, those admitted to the true, deep, reasoned knowledge at the heart of the order. And the traditions tell us that a new member might have to pass years, perhaps as many as 5, in strict silence before being admitted to the inner teachings, listening, learning, proving their discipline and their worthiness before they were allowed to speak or to see the brotherhood's deepest secrets. 5 years of silence to earn a truth. That is the discipline of the arcane in its purest form. And what was the secret at the heart of it all? It was a vision of reality so bold that it still underlies modern science, dressed in the language of the sacred. The Pythagoreans believed that number was the true essence of all things, not a description of things, the essence of things. They believed that beneath the surface of the visible world lay a hidden order, and that this order was mathematical, that the universe was, at its root, built out of number and proportion and harmony. They discovered that the musical intervals that sound beautiful to the human ear correspond to simple whole number ratios in the lengths of a vibrating string. And from this, they leapt to a breathtaking conclusion, that the whole cosmos was tuned like an instrument, that the heavenly bodies themselves moved according to musical proportions, producing a great silent harmony, the music of the spheres inaudible to ordinary ears, but woven into the very structure of reality. To the Pythagoreans, this was not dry mathematics. It was a sacred revelation. To grasp the hidden numbers was to grasp the mind of the divine, to see through the veil of appearances to the perfect order beneath. Number was holy. Certain numbers and shapes carried deep spiritual meaning, and this knowledge was guarded, transmitted orally, wrapped in cryptic symbols and sayings. The famous Pythagorean symbola, maxims like "do not poke the fire with a knife," whose surface meaning hid an inner teaching known only to the initiated. The Pythagoreans also held a belief that set them apart, the transmigration of souls, the conviction that the soul is immortal and is reborn again and again into new bodies, a belief that made their purifications not merely ethical but a preparation of the soul for its journey beyond death. And now we come to the darkest and most famous story of the Pythagorean order, a story that shows, more vividly than anything else in this film so far, just how deadly serious these schools were about their secrets. At the foundation of the Pythagorean worldview lay the conviction that everything could be expressed in the ratios of whole numbers. All was number, and number meant the clean, rational proportions of 1 to 2, of 3 to 4. The cosmos was rational in the literal mathematical sense. And then, from within their own investigations, the Pythagoreans discovered something that threatened to shatter that entire beautiful vision. They discovered the irrational. They found that there exist quantities that cannot be expressed as a ratio of whole numbers at all. The most famous example arises from Pythagoras' own theorem. Take a square whose sides are 1 unit long and measure its diagonal, and you get a number, the square root of 2, that simply cannot be written as any fraction of whole numbers, no matter how large. It goes on forever, without pattern, without end. It is incommensurable. It is, in their word, irrational. To us, this is a routine piece of mathematics. To the Pythagoreans, it was a catastrophe. It meant that at the very heart of geometry, in the simplest possible figure, there lurked a quantity that broke their sacred doctrine, a number that was not a proper number at all, a crack in the perfect rational order of the cosmos. It was a secret that undermined everything they believed, and they treated it as exactly that, a dangerous secret to be hidden from the world. And according to legend, one member of the brotherhood, a man named Hippasus, revealed it. He let the secret of the irrational out beyond the veil, disclosing to outsiders the existence of these incommensurable quantities. And the tradition tells us that he paid for it with his life. In one version, the brotherhood put him to death. In the most famous version, he was on a ship at sea when the deed was done, and he was thrown overboard and drowned, either by his fellow initiates or by the gods themselves, as punishment for revealing a secret that was never meant to leave the order. We cannot be sure the story is literally true. It comes to us through later sources, and legend has certainly shaped it. But whether it happened exactly so or not, the story tells us something profoundly true about the mentality of the mystery schools. An ancient Jewish mystical text called the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, describes creation as an act of language and number. God, it teaches, created the universe through the sacred letters and through the divine numbers, combining and permuting the letters of the alphabet to bring all things into being. In this vision, reality is at its root linguistic. The world is written, it is spoken, and the letters and names are the source code of existence. If that is true, the implications are almost too large to hold. It means that the one who truly understands the letters and the names holds in principle the power of creation itself. And this is exactly what the tradition claimed. The names of God, and above all the sacred 4-letter name, the Tetragrammaton, too holy to be pronounced, along with the great expanded name of 72 letters that the Kabbalists derived from the Torah, were held to be sources of tremendous power. To know the true name of a thing was to have power over it, and to know the hidden names of God was to touch the very levers of creation. From this belief grew the famous legend of the golem, the artificial being that a great master could bring to life out of mere clay, not by chemistry or craft, but by inscribing upon it the sacred letters, the name of God, animating dead matter with the creative power of the divine word, language as the ultimate technology, the name as the command that reality obeys. But with such power came terrible danger, and the Kabbalists knew it, and they told a story about it that is one of the most chilling warnings about forbidden knowledge ever recorded. It is preserved in the ancient rabbinic tradition, and it concerns 4 great sages who entered the hidden realm, who ascended into the secret knowledge of the divine mysteries. The tradition calls it entering the Pardes, the orchard, the garden, a word that also gives us the term paradise, and that stood for the deepest and most dangerous mystical knowledge. 4 entered the garden, and the tradition records with stark economy what became of each. 1 looked upon the mysteries and died. The knowledge, or the divine presence itself, was simply too much for a mortal to bear, and it killed him. A 2nd looked and lost his mind, going mad from what he beheld, never to recover. A 3rd looked and lost his faith, becoming an apostate, so shaken or so transformed by what he saw that he abandoned the tradition altogether and was ever after called simply the other. And only the 4th, the great Rabbi Akiva, the tradition says, entered in peace and departed in peace. Only one of the 4 came through whole. Sit with the meaning of that story, because it is the very heart of why this knowledge was hidden. Here is a tradition saying, in its own sacred literature, that the deepest knowledge is genuinely dangerous. Not dangerous like a secret that embarrasses the powerful, dangerous like a live current, like a blinding light capable of killing you, driving you mad, or shattering your entire world if you approach it without the years of preparation, the purity, the maturity, and the guidance that the tradition demanded. This is why the study of the deepest Kabbalah was traditionally restricted, why it was said that one should not even begin until one was of mature age, well-grounded, and properly prepared. Not to keep the knowledge from the people out of mere jealousy, but because the tradition genuinely believed that unprepared exposure to it could destroy a human being. Here, then, is the strongest possible version of one of our 2 great answers to the question why. Why was the knowledge kept from the public? Because, said the Kabbalists, it can kill you. Because some truths are a fire that warms the prepared and incinerates the careless. 4 entered the garden, 1 came back. We have now seen the idea that the hidden knowledge is a technology, that names and letters and sacred words are the source code of reality, and that those who know them can command the powers of creation. And that idea leads directly and unsettlingly to our next chapter, because there was a figure, a king out of Scripture, who was said to have possessed exactly this power, to command not just matter, but spirits, to bind demons themselves to his will by the power of a name and a seal. And the legends of what he knew would spawn an entire underground literature of forbidden magic that has terrified and fascinated the world ever since. The king was Solomon. We now cross a threshold out of the realm of hidden philosophy and mystical experience and into territory that the modern mind finds much harder to take seriously, and that the medieval mind found genuinely terrifying. The claim that the secret knowledge could give a human being direct command over spirits, over angels, over demons, And the figure who stood at the center of this claim for 2,000 years was one of the most revered kings in all of Scripture, Solomon. In the Bible, Solomon is the wisest of all men. When God offers him any gift he desires, Solomon asks not for wealth or long life or victory over his enemies, but for wisdom, and God grants it to him beyond measure, so that his understanding exceeds that of every other human being. He is the builder of the great temple in Jerusalem, the golden king of Israel at the height of its glory. But alongside the biblical account, there grew up another Solomon, the Solomon of legend and of secret tradition. And this Solomon possessed a wisdom that went far beyond the judging of disputes and the writing of proverbs. This Solomon had mastered the hidden knowledge in its most operational and dangerous form. He knew the secret names. He knew the seals and the words of power. And with them, the legend said, he commanded the spirits of the invisible world. The most important source for this tradition is a text known as the Testament of Solomon, an old work composed in the early centuries of our era that purports to tell the secret story behind the building of the temple. And its story is astonishing. According to the Testament, Solomon was given by the archangel Michael a ring bearing a divine seal, a signet engraved with the sacred name of God. And with this ring, Solomon gained authority over the demons themselves. He summoned them one after another and compelled them by the power of the seal to answer his questions and to submit to his will. He interrogated them, learning each demon's name, its nature, the particular harm it inflicted upon humanity, and, crucially, the name of the angel or the holy word that had power to thwart and bind it. And then he set them to work. In the legend, the great temple of Jerusalem was built, in part, by the forced labor of bound demons, compelled by Solomon's ring to raise the house of God. Focus on the mechanism here because it is the same mechanism we have been tracing all along. Now turn to its most dramatic use. Solomon's power did not come from strength or from prayer alone. It came from knowledge, specifically from knowing the names and possessing the seal. The ring worked because it bore the sacred name of God, the same idea we met in the Kabbalah, that the divine name is a source of absolute power over creation. And Solomon's mastery of each individual demon depended on his knowing its true name. For to know the true name of a spirit was to hold power over it, to be able to summon it, bind it, and command it. This is the logic of the entire tradition of ceremonial magic that would flow from the Solomon legend. It held that the invisible world is populated by countless spirits, ranked and ordered, and that each has a name and a sign, a seal, and that the one who possesses the correct names, seals, and words of power can call these spirits forth and compel their obedience. The famous Seal of Solomon, the interlocking figure that became one of the most recognized magical symbols in the world, was held to be the very sign by which the king exercised his authority over the spirits. And the tradition spoke of a specific number of principal spirits that Solomon was said to have bound, 72 of them, each with its name, its rank, its seal, and its particular powers, which the king mastered and sealed away. And here is where the Solomon legend gave birth to one of the most notorious streams of forbidden knowledge in all of Western history. Because the claim that Solomon had known the secret of commanding spirits inspired, across the medieval and Renaissance centuries, an entire underground library of magical handbooks, books that claimed to preserve Solomon's own secret techniques, books that promised to teach the reader how to do what Solomon did, to summon spirits, to bind demons, to command the invisible powers. These books are called grimoires. The most infamous of them bear Solomon's name directly. There is the Key of Solomon, a manual of ceremonial magic that gives detailed instructions for the drawing of protective circles, the making of seals and talismans, the ritual purifications, and the words of conjuration by which spirits are to be summoned and controlled. And there is a related work whose most famous section, the Catalogue of Spirits, lists that legendary company of 72 demons, each with its name, its rank, its seal, and the specific knowledge or power it can be compelled to grant, along with precise instructions for safely summoning and commanding each one. These grimoires were copied, feared, banned, and hunted for centuries. To be caught with one could mean ruin or worse, for this was knowledge the Church regarded not as harmless superstition, but as genuine and damnable trafficking with demons. Now, we owe the skeptic a clear and honest hearing, and it must be given firmly here. The historical Solomon almost certainly did not command demons to build the temple. The Testament of Solomon is not history but legend, a work of religious imagination composed long after the king's time. The grimoires are not the secret archives of an ancient god-king, but medieval and early modern compositions, assembled from many sources, their attribution to Solomon a claim of borrowed authority. No spirit has ever been verifiably summoned by a seal or a name. On the plain question of whether ritual magic actually commands real demons, there is no credible evidence and a great deal of reason for doubt. But set aside the question of whether it worked and look at what the tradition believed it was doing, because that is the thread we are following. The Solomonic magicians believed they were operating a technology, a precise formal system of names, seals, symbols, circles, and words which, correctly performed, would produce a definite effect in the invisible world. They believed the cosmos had rules, an operating system, and that the secret knowledge was the manual, the set of commands that could make reality obey. This is one of the most provocative ideas in the whole history of the forbidden, and it deserves a chapter of its own, because it leads us to men who took it with deadly seriousness. Brilliant scholars of the Renaissance who believed that magic was not superstition, but the highest and most secret science of all, and one of whom claimed to have received directly from angels an entire language older than humanity, the technology of summoning. The idea we uncovered in the legend of Solomon that magic is not chaos and superstition, but a precise system, a technology with rules and protocols, did not die in the ancient world. It came roaring back to life in one of the most surprising periods in all of history. Not a dark age of ignorance, but the very dawn of the modern mind, the Renaissance. The age of art and science and rediscovery was also in its hidden chambers, a golden age of magic pursued by some of the most learned men alive, who believed they were recovering the greatest secret science of the ancients. To understand what these men believed they were doing, you have to set aside the modern image of the cackling sorcerer and picture instead something closer to an engineer or a programmer working with a system they believed was real and lawful. The ceremonial magician approached the invisible world as though it had an interface, and as though the ritual was the correct way to operate it. The elements of the ritual were not random. Each had a function. The circle drawn on the ground with precise care and inscribed with sacred names was a boundary, a protective enclosure, a defined and controlled space within which the operation could safely be conducted. The seals and sigils were, in effect, addresses and keys, the specific signs by which a particular spirit could be identified, called, and constrained, exactly as Solomon's seals had bound his 72 spirits, and the names, spoken in the words of conjuration, were the commands, the executable instructions that were believed to compel the invisible powers to respond. Circle, seal, and name, containment, address, and command. It is, when you look at its structure, uncannily like a description of a system with rules of access and control. The magician did not believe he was pleading or worshipping. He believed he was operating, performing a defined procedure that, if executed correctly and completely, would produce a definite result, and that, if executed incorrectly, could be catastrophically dangerous. The containment breached, the summoned power unleashed and uncontrolled. This is the deep meaning of the phrase, the technology of summoning. To its practitioners, magic was applied knowledge, a way of acting upon reality through its hidden rules. And the men who revived and systematized this vision were not fools on the fringe. They were at the intellectual center of their age. When the lost Hermetic writings were brought to Florence in the 15th century, the scholar Marsilio Ficino was set to translating them by his patron, and he came to believe he was recovering the primordial wisdom of Hermes Trismegistus himself, a divine knowledge older than Plato, older than Moses. Ficino developed a philosophy of natural magic, a way of drawing down the beneficial influences of the heavens through music, images, and correspondences, all resting on that Hermetic principle, as above, so below. His younger contemporary, Pico della Mirandola, went further, fusing the Hermetic tradition with the Jewish Kabbalah, and argued that magic and the science of the divine names were, properly understood, the highest confirmation of humanity's divine potential. Pico wrote a famous oration that has been called the Manifesto of the Renaissance, and its theme was breathtaking. That the human being occupies a unique place in creation, with no fixed nature, free to descend to the level of a beast or to rise, through knowledge, to the level of the divine. It is the Hermetic dream again, the great miracle that is man, now proclaimed at the birth of the modern world, and the whole system was gathered, organized, and set down by a scholar named Cornelius Agrippa, whose great work on occult philosophy became the single most influential handbook of Renaissance magic. Agrippa laid out the entire structure, the three worlds, the natural, the celestial, and the divine, and the ways the magician could work upward through them, from the powers hidden in earthly things, to the influences of the stars, to the sacred names and hierarchies of the spiritual world itself. Here was magic presented not as folk superstition, but as a vast, ordered science of the hidden connections that bind the cosmos together. And no figure embodies this world more completely or more strangely than an Englishman named John Dee. Dee was, by any measure, one of the most brilliant and learned men of the Elizabethan age. He was a distinguished mathematician, an astronomer, a geographer whose advice guided England's voyages of exploration, and a trusted advisor to Queen Elizabeth I herself. He assembled the largest private library in England. He was a man at the very frontier of the emerging sciences, and he devoted the later part of his life to an attempt to contact angels directly, and to obtain from them the deepest secret knowledge of God and creation. Dee believed that the highest wisdom could not be found in human books alone, but only by communicating with the angelic intelligences who stood closer to God. And so, working with a scryer, a man named Edward Kelly, who claimed the ability to see visions in a crystal, Dee conducted years of what he called the angelic conversations. In session after session, Kelly reported seeing angels in the crystal and hearing their words, and Dee meticulously recorded everything, and what emerged was extraordinary. The angels, they claimed, delivered to them an entire language, with its own alphabet, its own grammar, its own script, a tongue that Dee came to believe was the original language of creation, the very speech God had used to make the world and that Adam had spoken in Eden before it was lost. Today it is called Enochian, and along with it came a series of great invocations, the calls or keys, said to be the words of power capable of opening the gates between the human and the angelic worlds. Here, in the study of one of the most rational men of his age, is the whole tradition brought to a single burning point. The conviction that there exists a lost, sacred, original language. That language is the source code of reality, that the right words can open doors between worlds, and that the highest knowledge comes not from reason, but from direct contact with a higher intelligence. It is the Kabbalah's letters and Solomon's names and the Hermetic revelation, all fused into one desperate, brilliant, and secret quest. And we must, once more, be honest about the ground we stand on. Many have suspected that Edward Kelly was simply a fraud, a clever charlatan feeding an ancient and learned man exactly the visions he longed to see. There is no verified, repeatable evidence that Dee and Kelly ever contacted a genuine angelic intelligence. And the Enochian language, for all its intricacy, may have been the product of Kelly's imagination or of some deeper region of his own mind. The skeptic has strong ground here, and we grant it fully. But even the skeptical reading leaves the essential mystery untouched. Why did a man of Dee's staggering intellect, a mathematician and scientist at the cutting edge of his era, pour the last decades of his life into this? Because he was heir to a tradition thousands of years old that told him the deepest knowledge was hidden, was divine, was reachable only through secret words and disciplined contact with higher powers. He was following the golden thread, the same thread we have traced from Eleusis to Egypt to Hermes to the Kabbalah, the conviction that behind the visible world lies a hidden order, and that a knowledge exists which can unlock it. And that thread, remarkably, seems to run continuously through the whole of Western history, from tradition to tradition, age to age, as though it were all somehow one single stream. That is the pattern we must now confront directly. We come now to what may be the deepest secret of all, the one that lies beneath every mystery school we have entered, the promise hidden inside all the others. Because underneath the philosophy and the magic and the transformation of matter, the mysteries were always ultimately about one thing, the soul and its journey beyond the body. And some believed the greatest initiates had learned to make that journey not only after death, but while still alive. Return one last time to Egypt, because the Egyptians mapped the world of the dead more thoroughly than any people before or since. They called it the Duat, the vast and perilous otherworld through which the soul had to travel after death, a landscape of gates and guardians, of fire and darkness, of monstrous beings and hidden dangers, which the deceased had to cross in order to reach the judgment of Osiris and the hope of eternal life. And the Egyptians did not send their dead into that landscape unprepared. They gave them a guide. The texts we casually call the Book of the Dead and the great funerary compositions inscribed on the walls of the royal tombs were, in the most literal sense, guidebooks to the afterlife. They contained maps of the Duat, its regions, and its gates. They named the guardians who stood at each threshold, and they provided the exact words, the spells and passwords and declarations that the soul had to speak in order to pass safely through each gate, to answer the guardians, to overcome the dangers, and to win through to the blessed realm beyond. Does that sound familiar? It should. It is precisely what we found buried in the Greek graves, the Orphic gold tablets, with their instructions for the soul, their warnings about which spring to drink from, their secret passwords for the guardians of the underworld. Across cultures that were centuries and seas apart, the same astonishing idea. that the passage through death can be navigated if you have the map, that there is a secret knowledge, an operational knowledge, which is nothing less than the survival guide for the soul's journey through the world of the dead, and that this knowledge, the most precious of all, was exactly what the mysteries claim to possess. But here the deepest and most secret claim of the mystery schools comes into view, and it is genuinely startling, because the mysteries did not only prepare you for the journey your soul would take after death. They claimed at their highest levels to let you take that journey now, before death, while still in the body. There is a clue to this hidden in the Greek language itself. The Greek word for to die and the Greek word for to be initiated were strikingly similar, and the ancients themselves noted the resemblance and treated it as meaningful. To be initiated, they said, was to die and to be born again. The initiation was a rehearsal of death, a practiced dying. The candidate was led through darkness and terror, brought symbolically to the very threshold of the underworld, made to undergo the experience of death itself, and then returned, reborn, to the light. Recall Apuleius and his initiation into the mysteries of Isis. I approach the boundary of death, he wrote. I set foot on the threshold of the underworld, and I was carried through all the elements, and I returned. He was describing, in the only words the oath would permit, a journey to the land of the dead and back, undertaken while still alive. What was actually happening in these rites? The most provocative answer, held by the esoteric tradition for centuries and echoed in the modern practice, sometimes called astral projection, is that the initiate was taught through the fasting and the darkness and the ritual and perhaps the sacred potions to loosen the soul from the body, to send the conscious self out of the physical form and into the other world, to travel there and return, and so to know by direct experience that the soul can exist apart from the body, and therefore that it will survive the body's death. If you have already left your body and returned, the reasoning goes, then death holds no more terror for you, because you have been to the far side and come back, you know. And this perhaps is the answer to the great riddle of Eleusis, the riddle that opened our journey. Remember what the initiates all said, that after the mysteries they were no longer afraid to die. Remember Cicero and Pindar and Sophocles, the greatest minds of the age, testifying that they had seen something that gave them serene confidence in the face of death, and refusing for 2,000 years to say what it was. What could do that to a person? What experience could permanently remove the deepest fear a human being carries? The esoteric answer is simple and staggering. They were shown or made to experience the survival of the soul, not told about it, not argued into believing it, shown it in a way so direct and undeniable that it changed them forever. Whether through a genuine separation of consciousness from the body, or through a visionary experience so profound it carried the same conviction, the initiate came out the other side knowing in their bones that they were more than their body and that death was not the end. That, the tradition suggests, was the ultimate secret of the schools. Not a doctrine, not a name or a formula, an experience of the deathless soul. We must hold firmly to honesty. Modern science finds no verified evidence that consciousness can leave the body and travel independently of it. The out-of-body and near-death experiences that people genuinely report are studied today as phenomena of the brain, powerful and real as experiences, but explained by most researchers as products of the mind under extreme conditions rather than as the literal flight of a soul. On the hard question of whether the soul truly departs the body and survives, science returns no proof, and we will not pretend otherwise. But notice, one final time, what the skepticism does not touch. It does not touch the experiences themselves, which were real and transformative and reported consistently across thousands of years and dozens of cultures. Something happened to the initiates of Eleusis. Something happened to Apuleius in the temple of Isis. Whatever its ultimate nature, whether a genuine glimpse beyond the veil or a profound event within the human mind, it was powerful enough to dissolve the fear of death in the hardest-headed men of antiquity and to bind them to silence for 2 millennia. The mysteries had found something, and they guarded it as the most precious secret a human being could possess. Now we have followed the forbidden knowledge through all its forms, the sacred experience, the divine names, the transformation of matter and soul, the command of spirits, the flight beyond the body, and a strange thing has happened along the way. We have begun to see that all of these traditions seem to be reaching for the same things, using the same machinery, echoing the same ideas across the centuries, as though they were all branches of a single hidden tree. It is time to ask whether that is true, whether there really is one golden thread running through all of it. Step back now and look at the whole landscape we have crossed. The mysteries of Eleusis and the gold tablets of Orpheus, the temple secrets of Egypt and the house of life, Hermes and his emerald tablet, the brotherhood of Pythagoras, the alchemists and their great work, the Kabbalah and its names of God, Solomon and his bound spirits, the Renaissance Magi and John Dee's angels. Traditions separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, arising in different languages among different peoples, worshipping different gods. And yet, look at how much they share. Have you felt it, building part after part? The same ideas keep surfacing as if from a common source. The same machinery keeps appearing as if copied from a single blueprint. Consider the echoes. Every one of these traditions holds that reality has a hidden structure, invisible to ordinary sight, that can be known only through secret knowledge. Everyone holds that as above, so below, that the human being mirrors the cosmos and can act upon the greater world through the smaller. Everyone guards its knowledge behind grades of initiation, oaths of secrecy, and coded language. Everyone teaches that the human being can be transformed, elevated, and made divine. Everyone is obsessed with the journey of the soul beyond death and claims to hold the map. And running through all of them is the same conviction about names and words and letters. That language is the deep structure of reality, and that to know the true names is to hold power over the world. The same ideas, the same machinery, the same promises, in tradition after tradition that supposedly had nothing to do with one another, which raises the great question that this whole film has been circling. Is that a coincidence? Or is it a clue? Are these many rivers, or are they one stream flowing underground, surfacing here and there across the centuries under different names? The esoteric tradition itself gave a bold answer, and it is one of the most influential ideas in the entire history of Western thought. It held that there was, in the deepest antiquity, a single original revelation, a primordial wisdom given to humanity at the dawn of time, at the source, containing the true knowledge of God and the cosmos and the soul. And that this original wisdom was then passed down in secret from teacher to teacher, from tradition to tradition, across the ages, surviving in fragments, guarded by initiates, resurfacing again and again in new forms. The Renaissance scholars gave this idea a name. They called it the Prisca Theologia, the ancient theology, and the Philosophia Perennis, the perennial philosophy. the one deep truth that underlies all the traditions. They drew up a genealogy of the great initiates through whom the sacred wisdom had been transmitted, a chain of teachers reaching back through Plato, through Pythagoras, through Orpheus, all the way to Hermes Trismegistus at the fountainhead. In this vision, every mystery school, every esoteric tradition was a channel carrying the same ancient water, a single hidden stream of forbidden knowledge running beneath the whole surface of human history. And the stream in this telling did not stop at the Renaissance. It flowed on into the secret societies that emerged in the following centuries, the mysterious Rosicrucians with their manifestos promising hidden wisdom, and above all the tradition of Freemasonry, with its grades of initiation, its sworn secrecy, its symbols and rituals drawn from the Temple of Solomon and the ancient mysteries, its self-understanding as an heir to the wisdom of the ages. The same architecture, the grades, the oaths, the coded symbols, the promise of hidden knowledge carried forward into the modern world and still with us in some form today. Now we owe the skeptic a full and honest hearing, and it is important. Modern scholarship has shown that the neat genealogy of the ancient theology is, in large part, a construction. The great blow came when a scholar demonstrated, through careful analysis of their language, that the Hermetic writings were not the primordial revelation of a teacher older than Moses, but were composed in the early centuries of our era, far later than the Renaissance believed. The idea that all the traditions descend in an unbroken chain from a single ancient source is not supported by the historical evidence. Much of the similarity between traditions can be explained in humbler ways, by the ordinary spread of ideas from one culture to its neighbors, by the shared inheritance of a few great civilizations, and by something deeper still, the possibility that the human mind, confronting the same great mysteries of death and meaning and the cosmos, tends to arrive again and again at the same kinds of answers, independently, without any need for a secret chain of transmission. That is a serious argument, and it may well be the truth. The golden thread may be, in part, a story the tradition told about itself, weaving separate strands into a single imagined rope. But even the skeptic must concede that the strands are real, and that some of them genuinely do connect. The knowledge of the Greek philosophers really was preserved and transmitted through the Islamic world and back into Europe. Alchemy really did travel that same road, carrying its Hermetic philosophy with it. The Kabbalah really was taken up by the Renaissance Magi and fused with the Hermetic and the classical. Texts really were copied, hidden, translated, and passed down, initiate to initiate, generation to generation. There really is a continuity traceable in the documents, running through the Western esoteric tradition. Whether or not it all descends from one primordial revelation, there really is a golden thread of transmission, and it really does run, in part, from the ancient mysteries down into the secret societies of the modern age. And whether the thread is one stream or many, whether inherited or independently rediscovered, it leaves us facing the single question that has driven us from the very first frame. All of these traditions across all of these centuries made the same fateful choice. They took their deepest knowledge and they hid it. They locked it away behind the grades and the oaths and the coded language and the threat of death. Why? What were they so afraid of? And what, in the end, were they really guarding? It is time at last to answer. We have arrived at the question that has been waiting for us since the first words of this journey. Why? Why did the greatest civilizations of the past build a hidden chamber inside their own knowledge? Why did the wisest human beings who ever lived swear oaths of silence, guard their deepest teachings on pain of death, and keep the mysteries from the mass of ordinary people? What were they hiding, and who decided that we were not allowed to have it? Across everything we have seen, three answers emerge. They are very different. They point to very different visions of what the mysteries really were. And the truth in the end may be that all three are real. The first answer is the hardest and the most cynical, and we must give it its full weight because there is real truth in it. Knowledge is power, and those who hold power rarely give it away. Throughout history, the keepers of the sacred knowledge were also, very often, the holders of earthly authority. The priesthoods of Egypt and Babylon were not only spiritual guides, but immense political and economic powers, and their monopoly on sacred knowledge, on the calendar, the rituals, the reading and writing that the common people did not possess, was inseparable from their grip on society. To control the knowledge was to control the people. If only the initiated priesthood can speak to the gods, interpret the omens, command the sacred words, then the priesthood holds the keys to everything that matters, and the multitude must come to them and depend on them and obey. In this reading, the veil of secrecy was, at least in part, a tool of control. A way for an elite to hoard the light, to keep the many in a useful darkness, while the few enjoyed the power and the privilege that knowledge conferred. The oaths and the grades and the terrible penalties were not only about protecting a sacred truth, they were about protecting a monopoly. And there is no doubt that this dynamic was real, that secret knowledge has been used again and again across history as an instrument of power over those kept outside the circle. Anyone who tells you the mysteries were purely noble is not being honest about human nature. Where there is a secret, there is very often a hierarchy, and where there is a hierarchy, there is very often the will to keep it that way. But the second answer cuts in a different direction, and it too has echoed through everything we have seen. Perhaps the knowledge was hidden not to protect the powerful, but to protect the people. Because some knowledge is genuinely dangerous. Remember the four who entered the garden of the Kabbalah. One died, one went mad, one lost his faith. Only one came through whole. Remember the Pythagoreans and the secret of the irrational number, treated as a truth so disruptive that it could unravel the very order of meaning if released into unprepared minds. Remember the alchemists and the ceremonial magicians and their conviction that their operations, wrongly performed, could bring genuine catastrophe. Over and over, the traditions themselves insisted that their knowledge was not merely precious, but perilous. A live current, a blinding light, a fire that warms the prepared and incinerates the careless. In this reading, the grades of initiation were not gatekeeping for its own sake, but a genuine and careful preparation, a way of strengthening the student step by step until they could bear a truth that would have destroyed them if it had come too soon. The oath was not only about control, but about responsibility. The refusal to place a dangerous power in unready hands. We understand this instinct perfectly well in other domains. We do not hand the deepest secrets of, say, the atom to anyone who asks. We recognize that some knowledge carries the power to destroy, and that its release must be careful, gradual, and guarded. The mysteries believed exactly this about the deepest truths of the spirit, that they were too dangerous to give away. And the third answer is the most subtle and perhaps the most profound, and it may dissolve the entire question. Perhaps the deepest knowledge was hidden not because it was withheld, but because it genuinely could not be told at all. Return to where we began, to Eleusis, and to Aristotle's crucial observation. The initiates, he said, did not go there to learn something. but to experience something and to be brought into a certain state of mind. The secret of the mysteries may not have been information at all, not a fact, not a doctrine, not a formula that could be written on a page and handed over. It may have been an experience, a transformation, a direct encounter with something that words are simply incapable of carrying. And if that is so, then the secrecy was not a wall built around the knowledge. It was the very nature of the knowledge itself. You cannot tell someone the taste of salt or the color red or the feeling of love to a person who has never known them. You can only bring them to the experience and let it teach them directly. The mysteries may have been guarding a knowledge exactly like this, a truth that can only be known by being lived, that can only be transmitted by leading a person carefully and in stages to undergo it for themselves. In this light, the whole machinery, the grades, the preparation, the ritual, the darkness, and the revelation was not a barrier keeping the knowledge in. It was the only possible method of teaching it, because the only way to know this truth was to be changed by it, and the oath of silence afterward was not so much a prohibition as a recognition of the impossible. What could you say? How could you tell it? The initiate returned from the telesterion not merely forbidden to speak, but unable to, holding an experience for which no words would ever be enough. 3 answers then. The knowledge was hidden to protect the power of the few. The knowledge was hidden because it was too dangerous for the unprepared many. And the knowledge was hidden because in its deepest form it could not be spoken at all, only experienced. And perhaps the final truth is that all 3 are true at once, braided together across the centuries, so that the same veil served to guard a monopoly, to protect the innocent, and to hold a truth that no tongue could ever fully tell. That is what the mystery schools were, and that is why, for thousands of years, they kept their silence. And so we come to the end of our journey behind the veil, and we are left, as the initiates always were, with more than we can easily put into words. We have walked the sacred way to Eleusis and stood outside the hall where the greatest minds of antiquity saw something they would never name. We have entered the temples of Egypt and the brotherhood of Pythagoras, read the gold tablets buried with the dead, followed the alchemists over their furnaces and the Kabbalists into the names of God, watched Solomon bind his spirits and John Dee reach for his angels. And everywhere we have found the same thing, a hidden knowledge, a guarded door, a veil deliberately drawn between the few who were allowed to know and the many who were not. Perhaps it was all a great deception, a tool by which the powerful kept the light for themselves and the rest of us in the dark. Perhaps it was a genuine and careful mercy, the protection of a knowledge too dangerous to give away. Or perhaps behind the deepest veil of all, there really was something, an experience of the deathless soul, a glimpse behind the curtain of the world, a truth so large it could only be lived and never told, that transformed everyone who touched it and left them silent for the rest of their lives. We cannot say for certain which of these is true. The oath in the end has held. The initiates kept their word and carried their secret into the dark and left us only the shape of it, the outline of something enormous, half seen through the veil. But here is the thought to carry with you, the one that should not let you go. The instinct that built the mystery schools has never died. The conviction that there are truths not for everyone, knowledge that must be earned, wisdom that can only be received by those who are ready, and powers that must be kept from unprepared hands. It is with us still, and it leaves each of us with a genuine question, the same question the ancient world asked at the door of every temple. Are there things human beings are not ready to know? Is some knowledge truly too dangerous or too sacred or too vast to be given freely to all? Or is every veil, in the end, just a wall built by the few to keep their power from the many? What do you believe? Were the mystery schools guarding a priceless truth or hoarding a stolen light? And if the deepest secret really was an experience that words can never carry, then perhaps the only way to know it was, and still is, to walk the road yourself. Tell us what you think in the comments. The best of them, as always, go further than we ever could. If this journey behind the veil changed the way you see the ancient world and the strange, enduring human hunger for forbidden knowledge, leave a like and subscribe and walk with us again into the next mystery.